when when as a grandmaster you play a sharp opening and then things kind of devolve from there. Alright, so here we go. So this is the game between Maxime Rothstein as white, grandmaster from Israel, and Gao Rui as black, grandmaster from China. Okay, so we're just going to kind of zoom through the opening. Okay, so queen b3 attacking a knight, knight to d6, d4, bishop g7, and e4. So it's kind of like a Grunfeld by transposition from this knight f3. And so now black, of course, operates standard procedure in terms of breaking down the center. He wants to control the dark squares, and so he plays bishop to g4. So threatening to take on f3 and take on d4. Bishop b5 check.
Check.
c6. And now white plays knight to g5. So threatening queen takes f7. So it kind of forces black reply, castle. Bishop e2. Bishop takes e2. Knight takes e2. Knight a6. Okay. So if we look at this position, you see that white has this kind of big center. But those pawns are also susceptible because they're kind of just floating out there. And black has a lead in development. Notice that he's castled and got all his pieces out. White still has not castled and still has not developed his bishop. So black has lead in development, but white has a big center. It's kind of a dynamic equality of sorts. If white can kind of get his pieces safe, he'll be better, but don't forget black will be doing stuff as well. Okay, so white plays this move queen to h3 with this obvious threat of queen takes h7 mate. So really only one way to defend it, and that's to play h6. So the knight's attacked, gotta move it. Only one square to go to, knight to f3. But knight to f3 also does two things. It defends this pawn, and it also attacks this pawn, because this knight was covering up this bishop. But now we have two attackers on this pawn, and only one defender. So now black has to make a little bit of a concession and play h5. Okay, so now, as white here, what do you think he should do? What do you think white should do? So it seems that white wants to try to make some progress on the king side, since black's pawns are a little bit weaker, since black was forced to play this move h5. So, you know, a move like castle, while routine, doesn't exactly play into white's plan of trying to attack on the king side. And white can't really play g4 immediately because queen c8 and this pin is rather annoying. Rook g1 and knight b4, and all of a sudden it's kind of awkward. So what should white do? So white plays the kind of provocative move rook to g1. Rook to g1. And now his idea is he just wants to play g4. And g takes h5, and h takes g6, and queen h7 mate. And so black should probably try, in this position, knight to b4. This has actually never been played before, knight to b4. This position has been played before, after rook g1. But knight b4 has actually never been tried before. It seems like an interesting try, though. I'll just show you a sample line that might indicate that black is okay. So you're threatening knight c2, so king f1 is kind of forced. You'll see why in a minute. I'll go over some lines later where this happens anyway. So knight c2, g4, and you'll see why you can't take on a1. I'll go through that in a minute. Queen d7, rook b1, knight d4, knight d4, bishop d4, queen d3, hitting the bishop and threatening this. Bishop e5, take, rook g2, bishop e5, take.
Check.
So all that's kind of semi-forcing. We get this kind of endgame where it's 4-on-4. Black has a 3 versus 2 queenside majority. Black has an isolated pawn on e5, on e7, but white's pieces are not as active as white's, particularly black's bishop is more active than white's bishop, and his rooks can get more active than white's rooks. Because this rook on g6 is kind of quasi-active, it doesn't really have any place it can go, and this rook on b1 is very passive. So black's probably slightly better in this endgame. And so for future games, maybe black can try knight b4 as an option, but most black players have instead tried knight to d7. So the idea with knight to d7 is that we kind of trying to bring this knight around to help support the king's defense with knight to f6. Also, we're threatening to make a move like e5, which kind of blockades the center and allows us to gain some squares for our pieces. Which is why, in this position, white, to kind of counter both of these ideas, played e5. So the idea of e5 is that he wants to stop e5 himself and also to stop knight f6. So for example, if he plays g4 right away, the problem is after knight b4, king f1, knight c2, rook b1, black can play e5. And this attack isn't really going anywhere, unfortunately. Because this knight's coming to f6. And if you take on h5, I can actually just take on d4. Maybe even with the knight. And if you take on g6, I'll just take on g6. And my king is actually relatively safe here, because I'll take on f3. But actually, let me go back and move. So yeah, if you take on... Oh wait, did I miss a move? Oh yeah, I missed a move, sorry. Yeah, so yeah, if g4 right away, you take first. My apologies. Queen g4, knight b4, king f1, knight c2, rook b1, and then e5, yeah. And again, okay, there's no attack, because this is too slow. And now I'm starting to take on d4, my knight's coming to f6, and this is probably good for black. So that's why he played e5 in any case. Okay, instead of g4 right away. Okay, so e5. And now, well, you might as well play knight b4, because what else? So now we're threatening knight c2. And so what should white play here? What should white play here? So it seems like we need to stop this threat of knight to c2. But it turns out that we actually don't. We actually don't. And g4 is actually correct here. If we play a move like king f1 to get out of this, then after this move, knight takes e5, black actually just wins a pawn. Because notice, you can't take back with the pawn because queen d1 comes. Or actually, knight c2 first. My mistake. Knight c2 first. So yeah, if you take with the pawn, knight c2 first, and then I have a dual threat of knight takes rook, and I'm also threatening queen d1 mate. Because if knight e1, queen takes e1 is mate. So knight c2 first is very strong. And if you take with the knight, then after bishop takes, you can't take with the pawn because again, queen d1 is actually mate now. So after a move like g4, just pawn takes pawn, and black's just up a pawn and not really in any danger. And the other try that white has here is queen to b3, which simultaneously attacks this knight and defends the mate, and we're still threatening the bishop. But black can actually play bishop to d6, defend the knight, and defend the bishop, and just again up a pawn, and there's no real attack. Okay, so that's why after e5, knight b4, he actually just played g4 right away. So knight c2 check, king f1. Okay, so now the question is, can black take this? So, can black take this? Yes or no? Okay, so I mean, of course it's legal for him to take it, but the question is, can he survive the game and take it? And again, this has all been played before, so these sharp positions have been analyzed already. But no, you cannot take on a1. Because after knight takes a1, simply play g takes h5. And the threat is we simply want to take here, play knight g5, and play queen h7. And it's actually very difficult to stop that. So for example, queen c8, just trying to offer an exchange of queens. Pawn takes, we're threatening mate. So he has to take back. Knight g5, we're threatening mate. So he has to play something like rook f5, but now we just win all his pieces with check. We go check, and we go check.
Check.
And now the king has to go here. Now we go check, and then it's just hopeless. And if, for example, say e6, knight g5, with the idea of simply taking in mate, so for e8, take, queen h7, and knight f4. Knight f4 threatening knight takes g6 mate. And that's actually really hard to stop. It's actually really hard to stop. So, knight takes a1 is no good. So if not knight takes a1, well, what must black play here? So what should black play here? So how does black survive in this position? Because, okay, if he can't take the rook, what can he do to kind of make his position tenable? Okay, so actually black only has one move here. And the only move that black can play is actually knight takes e5. Every other move loses instantly. So again, the same tactic of queen d1 check and queen takes e2 saves black. So if h4, just knight g5. Again, simply threatening this and this. You have to play like bishop h6, take, and this is just pretty much hopeless. Rook g3, rook h3, queen h6 is coming. And no other tries are really any better. So knight takes e5 is first. It's forced. It's box. Okay, so now white pretty much has to take back, and he has to take back with a knight. So for example, he plays g takes h5. Well, you're not getting enough here. Knight takes f3, queen takes f3, knight takes a1, h takes g6, and queen d5. Simply centralizing the queen. And if you play queen h3, I can just take here and I'm fine. If you play h takes g6 here, trying to threaten mate, well, I can simply take back with the pawn. And now notice my knight's defended, and you have no real threats. Queen e6 check, I can just move my king. Or even block. I could probably just block, actually. And this is reasonable as well. So this is a little bit too much. And if you take back with the pawn, well, the problem is now after queen d1 check, king g2, queen takes e2. Now if you try to go gh5, I can take on a1. And if you take on g6, notice I can take back on g6, and this rook is no longer in the game. So this is good. So you'd have to try something like h6, bishop takes e5, or else you get mated. Notice that if bishop h8, this is actually mate.
Checkmate.
So you have to play bishop takes e5, and then rook e1, queen c4, knight takes e5, queen d5 check, knight f3, and f6. And okay, what's happening here is that black is up the exchange and a pawn, but he has some problems with his king. So black is probably slightly better here. You know, white can play rook takes e7, but black can play rook f7 and kind of defend and hold on. And this knight can't really get into the game because the queen pins it, and this bishop is kind of stuck as well because f6 takes like a lot of key squares. So black's probably slightly better here. So which is why white must take back with a knight. Okay, so knight takes. And of course we're gonna take back with the bishop. Okay, and now what should white do? So what should white do here now? Well, you can take the bishop, because queen d1 check, king g2, queen takes e2, and you're just down, what? 2 pawns, right? After rook b1, h g4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're just down 2 pawns, and your pieces are terrible, and you have no attack. So that's not what you want. So you gotta go for gh5. You gotta go for gh5. Okay, so now is where we get to the interesting part. So all of this has actually been played before. All of this has actually been played before. So the question is, what should black do here? What should black do here? Can anyone figure out what black should do here? Black has to make only one move here. So can anyone find the only move? Only move here. So I'll give you guys a minute. But black only has one move here, everything else loses. Alright guys, did you come up with the move? The only move? The super move? Queen to c8 box. Every other move loses instantly. So the idea is we just want to try to lessen the impact of this mating attack by trading queens. So we'll get to this move in a second, because this was actually played before in a game. And it was played between Cheparinov and Sutovsky in the Pekovsky Memorial of 2013. So we'll get to that game in a minute. But let me actually show you what happened first in the game between Rothstein and Gaorui. So Gaorui in this position did not play queen c8. He played bishop g7. And he lost miserably. So let's just see how this game ended. H takes g6, threatening mate. So you gotta take, but now the point of why queen c8 only move is clear, because this queen can move sideways. And the sideways move it can make is to b3. Queen to
Check.
b3 check. And black is completely busted. So I'll just show you the finish, but e6, queen takes e2, and now black's just down a piece, and his king sucks. So queen h4, bishop e3, rook f5, rook takes g6, queen h7, knight f4, rook a f8, queen e4, king h8, and rook g4. And black resigned. So Gaorui either forgot his preparation or didn't know the preparation to begin with when he played bishop to g7. But queen c8 has actually been played before, so we'll get to that now, because that's actually the interesting line. Okay, so queen c8. Okay, so now white actually has a variety of moves he can play. Okay, let's take a look at queen takes c8 first. So queen takes c8, rook a c8, so I'm hitting the rook. So rook b1, bishop takes h2, rook g4, bishop d6, hg, fg, rook g6,
Check.
king f7, and black is actually probably slightly better in this endgame. Because now notice that this is isolated, and this is isolated as well. So it's still 4 on 4, but remember that other endgame I showed you where it was 4 on 4, at least white's pawns were together. In this endgame, white's pawns aren't even together, and black still has the better king and the better pieces. So this is probably not that great. Okay, let's look at queen h4, for example, trying to keep the queen active. Well, here, just bishop f6, gaining a tempo, so we remove the bishop from capture with tempo. Bishop g5 and queen f5, and again, black is probably slightly better, because he's kind of removed the issue with his king, and if like rook d1, for example, now black can actually play knight e3 check. Because of this fork, and this is pinned, and this is pinned. So white would probably have to take on f6 first, and then do something like rook c1 or something, but in any case, black is fine. Because the queen even defends c2. Okay, so another try that white could go is queen f3, trying to keep on this square. And now queen f5 is not possible. But here, just bishop g7, blockade the file. And now we're threatening to take, so if pawn takes pawn, there's no more mate threat, so we can actually take the rook. So he'd have to play rook b1, and now just queen e6, and again, this is probably slightly better for black, because after take, the rook gets open. So now we'll look at the two moves that are probably the best in this position. So one is queen to d3, with the dual threat, again, of here and here. But this probably leads to nothing more than a draw. Take on a1. So if you take on g6, it's actually a mistake, because I can just go here. Save my bishop and no mate. Take, I'm going to take with the rook, obviously. Not with the king, because this is mate.
Check. Checkmate.
If I take with the rook, I'm fine. But you don't take on g6. You take on e5 instead. Then after rook d8, it's just a draw after rook takes g6.
Check.
Take, and this is a draw. Because
Check.
black is up, a rook in an exchange. But he can't avoid the pressure. He can't go this way because of mate.
Checkmate.
So he has to go this way, and white has nothing better than to actually take the draw.
Check.
Because if he tries like bishop h6, then this rook gets into the game and there's no more checks and there's nothing. So he has to take the draw. So nothing more than a draw there. So the other thing that the white can try, and which was tried in this game between Cheparinov and Sutowski, was rook to g4. Another good move. And the idea of rook to g4 is just to block this and to simply, again, threaten g takes h6 and queen h7 mate. So, okay, now we gotta navigate the minefield. Now we gotta navigate the minefield. So, again, what must black play here? Again, black's move is forced. And believe it or not, black has to find 7 forced moves in a row. So, black has to find 7 forced moves in a row. So queen c8 was one. Now, he needs to find another forced move. So the forced move is queen f5. Bringing the queen into the game. Covering some key squares. So d takes e5, and now forced move number 3 is rook to d8, but rook a d8. So it seems awkward, but you actually need this rook on the f-file for some things after pawn takes, pawn takes. So that's why I want to keep the rook on the f-file. Okay, h takes g6, and now forced move number 4. Forced move number 4. So by the way, in the Cheparinov-Sutowski game, we got a bit of an iron king, because Sutowski tried rook d1.
Check.
Which looks good because after king g2, knight e1,
Check.
king g3, queen f3,
Check.
king h4, queen f2,
Check.
king g5, f6,
Check.
king h6. It looks great, right? This king on h6 looks terrible, but actually this is completely hopeless and black is lost here. So this is actually what happened in the Sutowski game. This king got to h6, and then black played f5. White moved his rook. Black took this. Whoops. White moves his rook. Black took on e2. And now simply king to g5 with the threat of queen h7 mate. And believe it or not, that's not easy to stop. And by not easy, I mean it's actually very hard. So f7 pretty much forced. Take,
Check.
take,
Check.
king e8, and now the cute idea of bishop f4 to cover c7. So that after rook takes e1, he played e6, and white wins. Black resigned here because of queen f7 and queen f8 mate. Notice that the bishop covers c7, and notice there's no checks. I mean, you can check here, but
Check.
I don't actually need my rook. Rook takes, queen takes, check,
Check.
and mate.
Checkmate.
So Cheparinov won a very nice game involving a king walk to h6. Kind of drastic how this king got from f1 to h6 in 6 moves. Or 5 moves, actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All forced. But Sutowski didn't realize that this king walk actually was leading to his own demise. Okay, so rook d1 was incorrect. So he has to take back pawn takes. He has to get rid of this pawn. But it's not so simple. It's not so simple. Because he still has to find 5 only moves in a row. Or sorry, 4 only moves in a row. So knight f4, okay. Now, what must black play here? So now black must kind of do this forcing line, because the problem is white's threatening like rook takes g6. So he has to go into this forcing line. Rook d1 check,
Check.
king e2, rook e1 check,
Check.
king d2, rook d8 check,
Check.
king c3. And now, knight takes a1. And the point is after rook takes g6,
Check.
queen takes g6, knight takes g6, there's a perpetual. Rook takes c1, king
Check.
d4, rook d4,
Check.
king a3, knight c2,
Check.
king b3, knight a1,
Check.
king a3, knight
Check.
c2, king b3. And this is a draw. But anything else, if you don't get this perpetual, you're losing. Because after knight f4, again, actually rook takes g6 is also an issue. Actually, yeah, rook takes g6 is actually the main issue. So if you go something like, I don't know, knight takes a1, rook takes g6,
Check.
and now the problem is if you move your king, your queen hangs,
Check.
and so you have to take, but now, again, you're just losing. Because there's ideas of e6 and queen h8 mate, and also knight takes e7, knight takes f8, this bishop getting into the game. White has too many pieces, in addition to having the queen. Also, this knight's kind of silly. So yeah, this whole forcing sequence with rook to d1,
Check.
rook to e1, rook to d8, knight takes a1 now, because now this is check, so we can
Check.
do this,
Check.
and this check, whoops, so you always want to keep checking,
Check.
and draw.
Check. Check.
So this is what should have happened in that Sutovsky game, if he had not played that rook to d1 check, and instead played f takes g6 right away. So he could have mitigated some of the sting if instead rook d1 check wasn't actually the worst idea. But after
Check.
king g2, knight e1 was already too much. He should probably just take back with fg6 and try to transpose into the other line. The problem is though, queen b3 check,
Check.
rook d5, queen g3, knight takes a1, and knight f4. And here white's down the exchange, but notice how he has full amount of pawns for it, and this pawn is definitely falling, and this knight's stuck, and this rook is bad. So white is doing quite well here. But okay, at least he's not losing by force, like he was in the actual game. But it's funny that all this had been played before just a year ago, but that black in the game of the Politiken Cup didn't realize that after knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, g takes h5, he actually has an only move here, which was queen to c8. And instead he played bishop to g7, and he just lost because of his queen b3 check idea. So the moral story is if you're going to play some super sharp opening line at the Grandmaster level, you better make sure you know your previous games, and you better make sure you don't repeat the mistakes of the previous games. Because, okay, even if he had found a queen c8 like Sutovsky did, and even if he had found queen f5 like Sutovsky did, and even if he had found rook a d8 like Sutovsky did, you'd still have to find fg6 instead of rook d1 check. And probably Sutovsky actually had this game on his computer himself, but he probably misremembered it. Because notice, he played this rook d1, knight e1 check stuff first, but if he had remembered to play this first, then after knight f4, rook d1 check,
Check.
now king g2, knight e1 check is actually good. Now this is actually good, so this is why white must go this way. And again, this line that I showed you before. But yeah, he just forgot this f takes g6 move, because yeah, king g2 here is actually not that great. Because actually I think queen e4 check first, f3, then knight e1 check,
Check.
and then king g3, and then just rook to d3, and all of a sudden white's all pinned up. Because if you can take here, but I'll take here. So, you know, you can take here, but I'll just take,
Check.
and then go here,
Check.
and now black's winning. So, one little move or slip up can spell doom for you in these super sharp lines. But I thought that was kind of interesting juxtaposition between the Satoshi game with this super king walk where white won, and the other game, the Gao Rui game against Rojstein, where Gao Rui just didn't see queen c8 or didn't know about queen c8, and his position kind of collapsed instantly.